Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The emergency exits are to the rear, to the right, and the left. Lieutenant, would you please call the roll?
Robert Toman.
Here.
James Mooney.
Present.
William Ball.
Here.
Krista Barringer.
Here.
Christine Bellarosa.
Here.
Susan Gage. Here. Raymond McCleary. Scott Polston.
Here.
Timothy Wells.
Here.
Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes of the April 12th board meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mooney, is there a second? Second by Mr. Wall. Any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Student rep report, Ms. Earhart.
Students returned last week from trips to Disney, Italy, and Myrtle Beach. Seal by Literacy students will be presenting this Wednesday and Thursday, April 19th and 20th after school. 2 students will be presenting to qualify for this prestigious seal. They will be demonstrating proficiency in Thai and Spanish. National Honor Society induction will be Thursday at 7 p.m. in the auditorium. A graduation walkthrough is being planned for seniors to walk through their elementary buildings in cap and gowns. Any students from Mount Marion will have the opportunity to see Universal Pre-K or go to an elementary building of their choice to celebrate.
Presentations and honors, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Ersick.
Good evening. Right around the corner will be the graduation for the class of 2023. We want to recognize our valedictorian this year, who is Amy Hoyt. She has a weighted grade point average of 102.235. And she's quoted as saying, although Hoyt expressed gratitude for all her teachers, she has particular praise for calculus teacher, Ms. Kakilo, Ms. C, who I always call her as, and computer science teacher, Ms. Sauer. They both inspired me to go into the STEM field. She also added that they were both huge supporters and helped me feel more comfortable in my work. Our salutatorian this year will be Palak Patel. Has a weighted GPA of 101.168. Patel says she is excited about entering the medical field and attributes some of this desire from attending Ulster Bosie's New Visions Health Program. She stated, "I feel prepared to step into a hospital because of the things I've experienced throughout this program." She also noted that she has witnessed several real-life surgeries, including a gallbladder removal. So, congratulations to those two. So with that, we'll now turn over to our first presentation this evening. Ms. Anderson-Butler.
I don't have a microphone. I have a loud voice. Do I need it?
Yeah, take it just in case.
Take it just in case. Will this fit in?
Yep.
Okay. We'll try this. Okay. Is that good?
Yep.
All right. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity to share some highlights about our special education department, not the special education office, although I will, give a shout out to our office and the esteemed team that we have there that make us look like rock stars and superstars every day. What I typically like to do, you're my person, Dan, so I can give you the sign. I feel, I'm not comfortable without the clicker. I always just focus on some talking points. I like to make my presentations as informative and as easygoing as possible, just so that you have a better understanding of what it is, the work that we do, and how we are reaching the needs of our students with disabilities in the district. So a few pieces that I wanted to talk about was our focused interventions, some program highlights, and then of course you've been presented with a board report. I won't go through that line by line, that's for you. You all received that previously, so I leave that as an opportunity if you have questions towards the end specific to the board report. Focus intervention. So what are we looking at? So right now we are looking at our students with disabilities. Our classification rate is consistent or steady, I should say. It's wavering at about 18%. It is on a little bit of a trajectory heading up. I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in some of the other slides. I want to talk about our graduation outcomes. That's always one of our main goals and focuses in the district, is looking at specifically our students with disabilities and what our graduation outcomes look like for those populations. I really am struggling with our grades kindergarten through 2. I'll give you some highlights about that as well. There's definitely some concerns about those students coming in. I know Mrs. Kelder's here tonight. She can certainly weigh in on some of this as well. And then another focused intervention is we've been looking at our transition to grade 7 and our transition to grade 9. So our students that are leaving 6th grade going into 7th grade, and our students leaving 8th grade going into 9th grade. So on the next slides, I break this out into a little bit more detail. Classification rate, for those of you not familiar, in New York State there's 13 different criteria for classification or disabilities. Our rate in Saugerties is steady at 18% from last year to this year. We haven't had that much movement, but there was a slight increase from years prior, moving up towards 18%. This is based on the increased needs of our students. We are seeing some seriously concerning needs of our students coming in. I share anecdotally, I see Jane nodding her head because one of our challenges always in this department is how do you budget? So whether you're taking an increase of students transferring into the district, which I talked about as well, you can't budget. You don't know what students are coming in and what their needs are going to look like. Also, last year for 21-22, that was the first year that I've ever referred 4 students for residential placement in one particular year. I don't think in my entire career I've ever referred 4 students for residential placement. And surprise, one that came out is actually going back. So, and again, that's not a budget piece that we planned for. You know, we said that the student had met with success and came back and went to a program at BOCES and has not been successful and is actually going to go back to the residential placement. So again, I share all of this anecdotally because the needs of our students are definitely increasing. I'll talk about some of our focused efforts again, what we're looking at with what some of these needs are of our students. Our biggest challenge always is that our classification rate is increasing. We look at ways to keep that lower, but there's always ways to go through the back door and circumvent that, which parents sometimes do if they want their child referred and to determine eligibility. And what are our needs overall of our students? You can go to the next one, Dan. Okay, so looking at our graduation, were there any questions about our focused interventions or our classification rate? That's all monitored by the State Education Department. Looking at our students with disability, our graduation data, the state average is at 69%. In district for 2022, we were at 61%. 2021, we were at 73%. 2020, we were at 61%. And I didn't make fancy charts and slides, just some quick data sets to share with you. Looking at our specific interventions, Mr. Reed, of course, has shared specifically some of the focus that we've highlighted on at the high school level. We've offered this instructional skills lab for our students, so we've replaced old school resource room, if you will, with instructional skills where we're looking more on individualized support for our students so that they can pass the Regents exams and what it is that they need specifically in order to be successful to graduate with a Regents diploma and bring that graduation rate up at least to the state average. CDOS pathway, this is something that's near and dear to Dr. Kapler and I. We're working very carefully with our guidance team and with our CSE committees to really give information about what a CDOS pathway might look like. So that's called the Career Development of Occupational Studies. And that's looking at ways that we can take job placement, work-based learning, and ways that we can give credit-bearing opportunities to our students so that they can get this enhancement on their diploma. And some of the research that goes behind the whole CDOS pathway is that it's the carrot, if you will. So it provides an opportunity for hands-on learning as opposed to the traditional, books and study and take the Regents exam. It gives an opportunity for students to work in I call it the shed, it's not the shed.
Farm stand.
The farm stand, to work in the greenhouse. We've had opportunities to talk with our food service staff here about bringing in our students to get some credit just following and shadowing our food service staff so that they could have a breakfast card. So we're looking to grow that and move in that direction because it's another way that we can enhance our graduation outcome there as well. Any questions about graduation outcomes? Mr. Mooney?
What would you attribute the drop in graduation rate? I mean, we would have been back from COVID, pre-COVID numbers. I mean, I'm seeing that's a decent drop.
It's a decent
Is
drop.
it kids not being successful coming back, or is it what?
It definitely is children that have, students that have come back and are not meeting academic rigor. You know, we tried to pick up where we left off, and some students have gaps in their education in that capacity. There's some dropout information, which we've talked about previously, and I'll share that as well. It's a multitude of things. We don't utilize, you know, I was thinking you might have the dirty data, right? And I don't have a lot of dirty data to share, but some of the pieces also is that we don't utilize all of our multiple pathways for graduation. So New York State in 2016 offered the multiple pathways where students could gain credit in different capacities and enhance their diploma and graduate in that way. There's also the superintendent's designation, and we don't utilize that as well as we could either. You know, Mr. Reinhardt was a firm believer in that he would sign off on students that you have to take, what that means, the superintendent's designation, for those not familiar, is that a student has to take the Regents exam, and if they fail, you can make a case to the superintendent and they can sign off for it. Now, I know there's mixed reviews about this across superintendents across New York State, but Mr. Reinhardt was a firm believer. I hope Dr. Ersick shares a similar philosophy, and that this is a way to enhance our graduation rate and move our students forward.
Yes, we generally have between like 30 and 35 seniors in a class, so it's a decrease of possibly three kids or so as well, from that 73 to 61.
Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question specifically, but it's a multitude of things.
I was just curious what you thought, because, I mean, I know there's a lot of moving parts all the time, and kids move out, and that counts against us, you know. Sometimes programs just aren't the right fit kind of deal, but I was just curious, and, you know, I understand, you know, one or two kids leaving the program changes your percentage by a decent amount.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Next one, Dan. Grades K through 2. So what we're seeing, and everyone refers to them as COVID babies. You know, these are students that are coming with, oh, there's a typo. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. There's increased needs of social, emotional, and academic. So what we're seeing is a lot of disciplinary concerns from our elementary school age students, grades K through 2. You know, some of us have had first-hand experience covering buildings in a principal's absence. A lot of what we're managing there is an inability to get along with their peers, an inability to play independently, an inability to play collaboratively. But then there's an increased anxiety. So I could just go on and on and on about what some of the social emotional needs are of some of these students. I mean, the gap is just widening in terms of what these students need and how can we best support them. I'm looking at referrals on the daily that come across from students that are lagging behind in their academics. You know, what does that look like? So if you think of a second grader, you know, they were in pre-K when COVID first hit. And now they're in second grade, but we haven't really had a, you know, there's always this heightened fear of COVID. So students are missing school because a family member may be sick or they were exposed. And I could go on and on about what that looks like as well. But there's definitely a gap in academics. And we're doing our best in terms of trying to meet those needs. But if they didn't come with a solid foundation and we're not strengthening that foundation, we're going to see a larger gap in terms of what academic needs are in that capacity. Consistency. So, you know, this was a goal that I took on a few years back, looking at what students arriving in grade 7 and students arriving in grade 9 look like. And for this current school year, we were able to employ a CSE chair who chaired all the grade 6 and all the grade 8 annual reviews, and worked very carefully with the 7th and 9th grade team of teachers about what programs we will offer specifically for students with IEPs or students with disabilities, so that there's consistency, because previously there were all different kinds of recommendations that would come across, and the student needs weren't being met in that capacity. So now that we have one chair that chaired all of those meetings, The recommendations are solid. We were looking at IEPs this past week in terms of what the students coming into 7th and 9th grade look like. We also have worked with the building leader at Ms. Vale at grade 7 and working, we've offered a transition night for our parents coming into grade 7 for students with disabilities, so we offer them information about what the programs available to 7th grade look like. And then grade 9, we've offered, I'll show you some different programs that we've offered in terms of co-teaching and special classes. So this is what some of the programs, I touched on some of these a little bit. We're offering integrated co-teach in all of our secondary classrooms at this point, except 11th and 12th grade, but grades 7 through 10 are all integrated co-teach. I talked about the skills lab or instructional skills earlier, that's credit bearing. Currently there's 31 students enrolled, 100% pass rate. So at the upper secondary level, they're getting credit for that course. Enhanced life skills, this is something that we're proud of in our work. We were struggling a little bit about how best to meet the needs of the student population there. We were sending them out to ARC for a half day for their school to work program. As I've said previously, that's not an approved program from the state education department, so it's not aidable. We don't get any reimbursement on sending the students to that. Students don't get credit for that. They get the workplace availability and exposure, and they get some job skills, but we've been struggling a little bit about what that looks like. So for next year moving forward, we're going to offer that in-house. We have a teacher with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, willing to take it on and ready for the challenge. We offered special class reading this year. Yay to Dr. Rohrbach for really advocating for our literacy teacher, our reading teachers. We have 2 of those. They've been great, and we focused our intervention in that specific category for students that are 2 or 3 grade levels behind, and that's really where our intervention is working, and we've seen growth in that capacity, which I can talk a little bit more about too. Graduation outcomes I've talked about a lot. Lead teacher, we've taken a shift, and so there's a lead teacher from every building that is part of a monthly meeting that Dr. Kapler and I chair, and we have used the work of Dr. Rohrbach that has been shared with other teachers across the district. What does the Saugerties High School graduate look like? And so we've taken that work in our lead teacher meetings for what does a student with a disability leaving Saugerties High School look like? And we've connected themes, and to go back when Mr. Mooney asked about what are some of the deficits and why our students aren't graduating, there's similar themes that start in the elementary years. So this is our continued work moving forward. Absenteeism is huge. Family situations are huge. I don't want to over-exaggerate here, but there's definitely a disconnect. It's important to go to school. That's really what it boils down to. So what can we do with the younger years when they're in 2nd and 3rd grade to foster that, support that, cultivate that, and help them feel positive about coming to school? Because the research shows that if you come to school and your attendance is good, you will most likely graduate. Parent-led informational sessions. This was a goal that I took on with a parent. We've been trying to do this, I think, 2 years. And we launched it this year, and it just has not taken off. It's similar to a parent, a special ed PTA kind of opportunity. I was working with this particular parent who has good energy and a lot of enthusiasm. We picked out themes and topics, and we secured presenters. And the first session we did was really a mindfulness session, where we had a guest speaker come in and this other parent that was co-chairing with me, and we had no parents show up. So, we still feel enthusiastic. We offered a second one, and we didn't have any parents for that. And then the third one was snowed out, and then I have to say it kind of fizzled out after that. But it's still something that we're interested in. I mean, how do we pull parents in to learn more about students with disabilities, have a better understanding about their students' program, and moving in that direction? And I'm always open to suggestions. So I talked about the transition night, so I don't need to focus on that again. High school. So what we're doing at the high school, grades 9, 10, and 11, we are offering integrated co-teach for all of those grade levels. We have an 86% pass rate at the 9th grade level. 24 to 28 students with IEPs are currently enrolled in our integrated co-teach. Just a quick overview of what integrated co-teach means is that it's a subject area class, so it could be algebra, and then there is a subject area teacher and a special education teacher in there, and they're teaching together, co-teaching. So there's 2 teachers in that classroom, integrated in that there's students with IEPs in there and there's students without IEPs that are in that classroom. Grade 10, we've got a little bit of a dip in our pass rate, but what I've learned is that the current 10th graders, they've been a challenge in all 4 years that I've been here in the district. I'm still trying to figure out what the magic solution is for these students to motivate them, to get them interested, and really to take ownership of what their academic responsibilities are. Again, open to suggestions. I don't have the magic solution for them. And my 11th graders are doing fabulously well with a 91% pass rate, with about 20 to 21 students who are currently enrolled in the integrated co-teach. Skills Lab, I mentioned that earlier, we have a 100% pass rate, and then I talked about the enhanced life skills, so we're moving forward with that. I talked a little bit about special class reading. I talked about what we were looking at in terms of our criteria. Right now, our focus is on elementary level, grades 1 through 6. There's a multidisciplinary approach utilizing a 12-step Wilson reading method. When we say multidisciplinary, or multisensory, it's that we can't specifically name a program on a student's IEP, so we say it's multidisciplinary in our approach. But we are really focused more on the Wilson reading method, and that we're working on training our staff and getting them certified in that area. Students are screened to assess prior to placement using the WADE, which is a standardized assessment measure, and we have seen consistent growth. Our students that have participated since September of 2022, we've seen 1 to 2 grade levels in growth in terms of their participation in that program. Looking ahead, what do we want to focus on? Related services. So we learned this year that ways to enhance our, well, it goes with increased revenue also. We learned that for makeup sessions for related services, we have to change our formula structure and how we're identifying it on student IEPs. Typically, if your student has an IEP and they're getting counseling or speech, it's usually done on a 6-day cycle. We're now doing this annually, so it will say X number of sessions for the year. So that gives us the opportunity to go back and make up sessions, because we learned in a workshop that you're really only allowed to make up the session for that particular week that the student missed the session, and that's next to impossible. So that's why we're moving in an annual or yearly schedule for that. Always looking to improve our graduation outcomes. I talked about where we're moving our focus in our life skills community. Increased revenue. We really rely heavily on our Medicaid piece for reimbursement, because that's really the only way that we as a department can garner or gather any revenue, or our aid from our high cost students or from BOCES aid. But it's very expensive to educate a student with a disability. The state sets a threshold. I think we're at $49,000 for our high cost aid at this point. We have to meet that threshold, and then anything over that, then we would be reimbursed for. Continuum of services, this is something that we're constantly looking at. How do we bridge services? I had an interesting conversation with a parent today of a student with a disability. That's why there's an I in IEP. It's about being individualized. So while we don't have individualized specific programs, we do create an IEP that best can help and support the student. I always call it the nucleus. So we always start in the gen ed, that's our nucleus. How can we put all of our students in there, and what supports do they need in order to be successful? So the continuum of services is how do we keep our students in district? There's you saw in your board report, there's definitely been growth or an increase in our students that are in out-of-district placements. The needs have just become really, really challenging for us to meet in-house. And a lot of that is social emotional, psychiatric, the residential piece that I spoke of earlier. So there's definitely needs that it's shifting. It's not like it was when I had first started here. And then professional development. We look to see what our staff need. If we're moving in this integrated co-teach model across all of our programs, what do all of our staff need, even our gen ed staff, in order to be successful in that capacity? I think that's it, Dan, right? Yes. And then the board report I shared with you previously. Increased number of students served in district. Transfer students, they drove up that number a little bit more this year. Our dropout rate, records inconsistency. It's very hard to figure out or find students that had dropped out. We had identified 4 students. We were able to identify that 1 had moved out of the district, but still counted as our dropout, because even though they moved, they didn't really say that they had moved, so they still counted as a dropout because they didn't complete their school piece. 2 with long-term absences, and then 1 had attempted to re-enroll, and then there was some confusion when we were trying to get more information from the parent about, it was a student that had moved out of the country and then came back, and that student had wound up as a drop because they had missed 20 days of school, so they're dropped as a 20-day absence, and they weren't able to re-enroll at that point. The good news is we have continued to increase our declassification rate. So for students that are classified, at some point they may be declassified, and that's good information that there's been an increase in our declassification. And then I shared with you that we haven't really had any change in our overall classification rate this year from last year. And that is it. Questions, comments?
I have a few questions.
Sure.
You discussed K through 2. What about like 3 through 6? Like, because obviously the third graders were kindergartners when COVID kind of hit, and that probably set them a little bit behind. I mean, how are we seeing them adjusting? Because I'm sure there's some sort of social, emotional aspect to them that's not really, wasn't really addressed here, as well as like, the effects on how it's maybe affecting their reading skills, stuff like that. Because I mean, they were learning online when we didn't really have like a way to teach online. It was kind of like just by the seat of our pants at that point when COVID hit. And even as we came into the following year, we're still trying to figure out the bugs, so to speak.
So third grade is another grade. Third and fourth grade are really other grade levels that I express concern about as well. K2 I've spent a lot of my energy with the K2 right now, but 3-4 is also on the rise. Just in terms of, third grade, it becomes more challenging in terms of the academic rigor. So working with the third graders, where are those gaps and how are we supporting them? There's been an increase in our multi-tiered system of support, or formerly known as response to intervention. So students are being identified in that capacity. How often do they meet for that, Carol, with the grant rounds?
At least 4 times a year, more than that, unofficially.
So students are being identified to receive support. So that's almost, we call that the gate. So a student might qualify for RTI services or MTSS before they roll over or are eligible for special ed services. There's definitely an increase in third and fourth grade too.
And like you mentioned referrals before as well, at more at elementary level. Are you seeing like a rise in that?
Yeah.
I mean, and
Yes.
is it based? I mean, is it more like even like within the third and fourth grade levels, fifth and sixth?
Yeah.
I mean,
I have a pile on my desk right now that's like this. And there's a lot that goes into a referral packet, of course, but the majority of them right now are second and third grade.
Okay.
And, there's just so much, Mr. Wells. I mean, just in terms of the academics, where there's gaps. But then there's even, we've had an increase in our related services for speech and occupational therapy, which we can have students receive those services even if they don't have an IEP. And the occupational therapists are struggling with fine motor skills. So many of our students in K4 were utilizing a device. I'm all supportive of technology, but there's still certain pieces where you need to learn how to hold a pencil or cut with scissors, and they don't know how to do that. So then they have to be referred for occupational therapy for what I would call a low level. Another conversation, I forget what staff I was having. Oh, it was on our superintendent's conference day when I was with the elementary staff. We were talking about how some of the younger kids don't know how to utilize a utensil. Like they'll eat mashed potatoes with their fingers because they don't know how to hold a spoon or a fork. So that's another fine motor task. I don't know where we're at with our gross motor task, but there's an increase there too because they've been sedentary and not exercising or moving their bodies. So I hope that answered your question, but there's need. And, we knew this was coming. The state hasn't moved any of the benchmarks right now, or even any of when we're utilizing standardized assessment measures to determine eligibility. The companies haven't changed any of their normative data because they would have to re-norm the samples in order to determine that. But there's definitely gaps and deficits.
Mental health is big right now,
Sure.
all the way down to,
Pre-K.
this is the first year that I've had pre-K, K have to be hospitalized. Even TTP that we have in Mount Marion now has, other districts, but they're all seeing it. Kindergartners that are going there now, we never had that before.
No.
Thank you.
Oh, Mrs. Gage, you're welcome.
When you talk about referrals and your increase in out-of-district placement, are you hearing that from your other cohorts in the
Across the board.
area?
So Mrs. Gage is referencing, we meet once a month with the other special ed directors in the county for a monthly meeting at BOCES, and it's the same, and lack of available placements. So that's another piece that we struggle with. So, in the olden days, you would just refer them to BOCES, and 2 weeks they'd be in, and that was it, good to go. And that's just not the case anymore. We had 2 students that were accepted at a program up in Albany because we couldn't get them placed closer to home.
And I'm sure you're both aware that the developmental milestones in early intervention have changed.
Yes.
So that gap is getting wider
Yeah.
because they were having so many kids referred, they just lowered the skill level.
Right,
and
moved the
now
needle.
kids don't qualify, which is wonderful because then they come to school and the gap.
Well, and there's also, I'm responsible for preschool as well. There is a lack of preschool providers currently, so that's another challenge that we're faced with. I'm a huge fan of early intervention, for those of you that haven't heard me say. I think it's so much better if we remediate when they're younger, so that they're not missing academics and being pulled out for related services when they're school age. And right now there is a shortage of special education instructional staff for the preschool, and occupational therapy, and counseling, so social workers. So again, we modified that. We don't have a tremendous responsibility. We don't have any financial responsibility with the preschool. That's all handled by the county. But we've shifted some of our IEPs and changed some of the wording on our IEPs so that there's other opportunity for students that need counseling that can get it from other providers. So it used to be that if it was psychological counseling, it could only be provided by a social worker, but if it says counseling, it could be provided by a school psychologist or an intern that's supervised. Always looking for creative ways. Other thoughts or questions?
Can you, I'm unfamiliar with this, can you talk a little bit about the unique considerations for special ed considerations for special education graduation requirements?
Sure.
I'm sure there's a ton of them, I just don't even know.
Well, there's actually not a ton of them, Mr. Polson. Basically, a student with a disability is expected to obtain a Regents diploma and graduate. Now, there's other ways that they can attain that, but the outcome is still the same as their non-disabled peers. So there are different pathways, if you will. So a student can be eligible for one of 7 different pathways, and in that is what we talked about, the CDOS, the career development piece, but then there's other pathways about math or science, humanities, career tech is another one. And for the most part, this is actually my dissertation research, so we can talk about this all night if you want to. Many of the districts just choose humanities, because it's an easy one to check off the box, and then the student with a disability would graduate and then move on. But there are other opportunities, which, you know, when Mr. Mooney asked about the other students, how come our needle dropped or our number dropped, we're not looking at all those opportunities. And part of that is education and professional development. We have staff that aren't familiar with that, so we work really hard to give them those opportunities. I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions the right way, but basically they are expected to graduate with their non-disabled peers. Now, another safety net they have is that a student can stay in school with an IEP until they're 21. The state has needled with that a little bit. 2 years ago it was 23. Now it's back to 21, but there's chatter that it might be 23 again. So, you know, we're constantly in a chess match with the state also, because how do you plan a program for this? We have had students that stay longer, and we have had students that stay longer that aren't. Typically, it's the students that are in our life skills classrooms that stay until they're older, but I've had some experience with our students that are placed at BOCES that are staying a little, like a year longer than they would be expected to. Does that help?
Yeah, no, it does. Mr. Mooney mentioned when somebody transfers, it can count against us. Is that only when it's not reported properly?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we worked very closely with, when Dr. Ersick was handling our data, and with our central registrar, and with our reporting system, just to make sure it all checks and balances, because that's how it gets reported to the state. We're constantly asking questions because it's not one size fits all. You know, we had this whole conversation about students that were at TTP and how do you track and record that student. So there's always all these different mechanisms in looking at that and asking the appropriate questions.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Are you going
I
to?
was going to look it up.
TTP is.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's a 30-day intensive therapeutic program.
Okay.
So it's therapeutically driven. And I'm going to say academics over here, but the focus is on their mental health needs
Okay.
or psychiatric diagnosis. Anyone else?
I just had a quick question. When you talk about the graduation rate and then students being able to stay longer, so does, like, are you tracking the graduation rate with the cohort they're supposed to graduate with, or say
Yes.
they stay an extra 2 years, does it go with that graduation class?
It's always tracked with the cohort that they're supposed to graduate with.
So it's by the year they enter 9th grade?
Yeah.
That's their cohort year.
Okay.
So if you were to look at the state ed website where it talks about the cohorts, and it will say whether they graduated with their 4-year cohort, their 5-year cohort, or their 6-year cohort, so that they're always part of that original number that they were assigned in 9th grade. I'm sorry I didn't bring the monkeys, Mr. Tolman.
Thanks for that.
He asked how I was going to jazz it up. It's data. I think this is all, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public recognition, any member of the public wishing to speak on items on the agenda tonight or recent events, please approach the podium, state your name and residence, and feel free to speak.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Steinher. I live in Saugerties, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the situation at Riccardi Elementary School. Thank you, Dr. Ursig. Thank you, Mrs. Felder, for the communication as it's ongoing. As a concerned parent, I appreciate those updates, kind of understanding what's going on and what's happening. And I know there's still a lot to do, but I don't want to lose sight of some areas that we can improve upon. And one thing that came to mind was just like the planning and scheduling of this abatement work. It seemed like there was some demolition of the floor. So it seems a little disruptive to have the demolition during the spring break, have the students come back without a floor replacement until summer break. So one thing to think about in the future as we go forward, similar projects. The other thing that came to mind was proactive communication. I think the responsive communication has been great as far as the updates go, but some of the parents of students, and it seemed like some of the faculty were unaware of the work going on over spring break. So coming back to seeing, the floors removed and not really having an understanding of that before it happened or when the students came back. And finally, I think it's great that we have the ability to switch to remote learning. I'm really glad, we have the teachers on board, the technology staff, and the hardware available. And just, looking for future projects, maybe having that built in as contingency where things, I know we're getting samples tested and we got the all clear, but in the future, if there are things, where we have to meet requirements before the buildings can be occupied, maybe have that built into the plan. Could save a couple days to switch to the remote learning and get it, looked at as thoroughly as we can without the students there. So again, thank you guys for your effort. I know it's still ongoing, so I appreciate that. Just some things to look for in the future.
Thanks for speaking up. Anyone else? Now we'll move to the superintendent's report.
Good evening. So I'm here again to go over the 23-24 proposed budget, and we have not had any changes, and we have not received any news, any updated news, I should say, from the state budget. So it's pretty much the same presentation as I gave a few weeks ago. I just have a few updates at the end, so just go through it, maybe a little quicker than last time. Okay, so first I'd like to start off with the property tax levy calculation, and that's a multi-step calculation that the state comptroller's office provided to us, and it was started in 2011. The first step of the calculation is to take the tax levy from the current fiscal year. So we start at the top with the $42.5 million, and we multiply that by the tax-based growth factor, which is given to us by the state, New York State Division of Real Property Tax Services. And just wanted to mention that that amount right there is double what it has been previous year. So that's a good sign for our community. So that brings us up to $43,986,000 And then we add in our pilots, which is payment in lieu of taxes receivable of $249,683. And then we take that $43.2 million and subtract the local share of the capital tax levy for the current year, which was approximately $885,000, bringing the number back down to $42.3 million, which is then multiplied by the allowable levy growth factor. And this growth factor here that we include is a maximum of 2% for the consumer price index. So we're using the maximum 2% because the consumer price index this year is 8%, which is huge. Then that brings us up to $43.2 million. Then we subtract the payment in lieu of taxes projected for 23-24, which is down to $43,000. So we had one of our major, our largest pilot has finished up. That was over $200,000 with, not Central Hudson. No, yeah, Central Hudson. I'm just thinking something else. So that is ended, but we do have a solar pilot that just came on, but that is a net decrease in pilots from 1 year to the max of about $206,000. So the tax levy limit before exclusions is $43,182,741. And then we go to the calculation of the exclusions for the coming year. So the only exclusion we have available to us for next year is the capital tax levy, the local share of just over $1 million. And because the employee retirement system and the teacher's retirement system have not changed by more than 2 percentage points, so we don't use those in this formula this year.
Jane?
Yeah.
When that Central Hudson pilot comes off the pilot list, does that increase our tax base, or how does that work?
Yes. There. See, it's on now. It's on that low. Yeah, that should increase our tax base, and then within our revenue budget, you're going to see a decrease in the pilot's receivable line within the budget. But since they're going online and they're paying taxes, you know, it makes up for not having that revenue. We get it in their tax revenue instead. And can I just shut that off? It's not doing good. So in the capital, the local share of the capital expenditures here, this first slide has some estimated and some exact numbers for this coming up year. So the first one is the bands, which is a bond anticipation note, and P&I is principal and interest. So we're going to borrow an additional $13 million in June, and the estimated payments on that is at $1,780,225, and that's going toward the cash that we need to pay for the $22 million project. And the next one down is EPC. That's our energy performance contract, the principal and interest payment on that. And then the following is a capital outlay project for the 23-24 school year of $100,000. Then we have the BOCES capital expenditures, and that is our share of BOCES. Should say it's more like their building expenditures, like their bills for leasing of their various facilities and just maintaining their facilities. Our share is about $123,000. And then on the last line there is the bond anticipation note estimated principal and interest payment for our share of the BOCES capital project. So we have a payment due of almost $1 million in July of 2023. So we're going to be financing with a bond anticipation note, and our estimated payment on that is just under $500,000. And in the two bond anticipation notes, we're using a 5.5% interest rate on those. And then we also are going to do those bond anticipation notes at the same time, so then we can save on the cost of issuance if we do them together. And on this side, I have the sort of revenue side of the capital budget. The first one is the state building aid on cash projects. So these are cash projects from previous years, such as the Riccardi roof project, the Cahill gutters and boilers, and septic and sewer work at Mount Marion and Grant Morse. Then the next one we have is the state building aid. This would be our first payment for the energy performance contract. The following is an estimate with an early aid request for the $22 million capital project. So the estimate we got from our financial advisors is just under $1 million for that. The next is the state BOCES aid on those lease expenses for their facilities that I talked about. It's about $22,000. And then our share of BOCES aid for our share of the capital project payments that we've made to them is $185,187. And that's 2 years worth of payments that we made to them. That's our share we get back this coming up year. And then the last line there is an interfund transfer from our debt service reserve that we're going to pull into the general fund budget to offset some of the capital expenditure costs here. So that the total revenue is 1.7, and the total expenditure side of this was 2.7, giving us that total exclusion amount of just over $1 million. So that's the local share. It's the difference between all of those expenses and the state aid and the reserve use.
Have you heard anything on that early aid request? Have we gotten any feedback on that? So that was, we weren't 100% on that?
No, the financial advisor said that it was a pretty sure thing because of the situation we're in, but we haven't actually done the paperwork for it because we're not that far into the process. We just got our cash flows estimated amounts, and we're kind of working with the project scheduling to make sure we're going to have the right amount of money and what we're going to get done. So we're still kind of like working on the details before we can put those together.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so adding the exclusion with the tax levy limit calculation brings us up to the maximum allowable levy limit of $44,185,168, which is an increase over the current year property tax levy of $1,681,321, or 3.96%, which is the maximum for the simple majority vote. And again, major factors in this increase is the tax-based growth factor, the decrease in the pilot amounts, and using the max levy growth factor, and then the local share of the BOCES capital project is something new. And then we're using that debt service fund amount to keep us under 4%. So state aid projections is, have not heard any news from that. So the big thing here is an increase in the foundation aid to our full phase-in amount. So that's an additional $900,000 or 5.4% in the foundation aid. The overall increase is over $2.5 million or 11.7%. Then the next page has the breakdown. Again, that first one is foundation aid. So I have 3 categories here of amounts. So I have the 22-23 revenue budget, and then the governor's proposed amounts, and then I have the amounts where I've made a few adjustments as to probably closer to actual than what the governor's proposal is. I think I spoke last time about how the state aid runs go out there, but it's not an exact thing because they don't always have the latest information from the districts. So that first one, the foundation aid, is actually set to go up a little because in their initial calculation they used the CPI of 7.9%, and then they do a recalculation using 8%. So that gave us a little bit more there. BOCES aid, I'm pretty comfortable with that. And then that BOCES capital aid, I did speak of that last time, and how they calculated their $700,000 amount their way, but not the right way. So it's only $185,000. And then, let's see, the other big one, transportation aid, I don't expect that to be as high as they have here. We're not spending as much as we had budgeted, although that seems like it changes every day. And high cost and private excess, I'm still waiting for amounts on those. I think those are good to go with, but obviously this is budget and it will be a little bit different than that. And the building aid, so that's one that I've increased a bunch, and it goes back to that slide with the building aid amounts, with that additional payment that we should receive from the early aid payment. It'll bring us up to where we need to be. And I have not heard about that high impact tutoring, if that amount is going to stay as a set aside, or if we could just incorporate that back into foundation aid. So I think the only difference would be is where we actually record the revenue, because we're still going to get that total. It's just a matter of, do we have to set it aside and do reporting on how we spend it, or just keep it as foundation aid line. So revenue projections all together, total state aid, 24.7 million. Property tax levy amount 44.1 million, and we have other sources estimated at 1.8 million. And the other sources, again, are interest income, which we're doing great on that this year. Rental income, the pilot amount, which has decreased, and then that transfer from debt service, which is a decrease of 124,000. There's also non-resident tuition in there, health and welfare services in our public schools, BOCES refund, and Medicaid reimbursement. So the total revenue is estimated at $70,773,085. And then the next is just that little slide again about the different positions that are funded through the American Rescue Plan in particular. This plan goes on for another whole year. We have the other ones, the coronavirus response, something, that is has to be wrapped up by September 30th of 2023, but this one continues on until September of 2024. And then onto the expense side. So we have total estimated expenditures of $71,192,559, an increase of about over 4.7 million, or 7.17%. And again, the increase is due to the debt service related to capital projects, but those are offset with that building aid that was discussed. We're replacing equipment. We have contractual obligations, an increase in health insurance, and an increase in transportation with our new contract with First Student. So it's a 5-year contract that begins next year. And we did a request for a proposal. We received 2 proposals, and First Student was the one that we're going with. But it's a substantial increase over the current amount. So here's the budget breakdown, and it's just some of the major categories here. So you'll see the transportation amount there, an increase of a little over 9% over the previous budget year. And in the facility security and central services, we have an increase there that I have on the next page. And then debt service is, it looks huge when you look at the percentage. The increase there for the items that I previously spoke about. So I think I have a little bit more detail again on the next slide. So in the instructional category, it's equipment replacement and contractual salary increases along with special education is included in that category. And Ms. Butler spoke about that and the challenges that we face within that category. And then facility security, we have to do a building condition survey, which they like to call enhanced facility evaluation, which is required by the state ed department. So that's included there. It used to be every 5 years. It's not exactly every 5 years. Now they're telling us when we're going to have it. So it was every 5 years, but they did every district on that same 5-year cycle, which was kind of a train wreck. So then they decided it would be good to space it out, and so they've done that. So we haven't, our last one was in 2015. So we're due. Next, some personnel changes within that. That includes adding security guards and a director of facilities to replace some other positions. And we have a need for a new mail van, as well as replacing some AED machines. And then again, within transportation, we have the CPI increases for our other contractors, Cooksaki Transport and Lizette Express. And then we have a new 5-year contract with First Student. And then we would also like an additional van for in-house transportation. And then in the sports and co-curricular, a move to a full-time staff in the athletic office, and an increase in chaperones for our games. And then additional clubs that have additional stipends and registration fees, travel, materials, and supplies. And then within the benefits category, the health insurance, there's a increase in the active employees in our DHIC, which is Duchess Educational Health Insurance Consortium. But there is there's an increase for the active employees and the under 65 retirees, but there's actually a decrease for our over 65 retirees. They're trying to right-size the plan and make the premiums more equivalent to the claims within each of those categories. So it's an increase for the actives, but a decrease in the over 65s. And there's an increase in the employees' retirement system. The employer contribution is going from 11.6% to 13.1%. And then there's always seems to be an increase in the workers' compensation. And then next, debt service, again, which was offset with an increase in the state building aid revenue. You have the Ulster BOCES capital project, the principal and interest payments on the bond anticipation note, and then also the other bond anticipation note on our $22 million capital project. And then within we have the transfer to capital fund that I have to mention is a $100,000 capital outlay project for more of that flooring at the party. Next. So again, there are current year additions of school advocacy specialist. She's doing awesome so far, awesome work. Additional stipend positions for lead teachers. And then special education teacher aides and assistants where necessary. And then bus monitors. And again, we always need more of those. And then modifications within this is the move from the 0.5 FTE special ed teacher with a stipend to move to a full-time assistant principal athletic director. Door monitors would be replaced with security guards. 2 full-time teaching assistants would be replaced with 2 full-time field service technicians. And then we have our full-time head custodian and with a planned retirement at the end of next year and an anticipated retirement from our maintenance foreman, and those positions moving to a director of facilities. And then we have budgeted within the 22-23 school year for a technology teacher, and that position remains vacant, and we'd like to offer that as a full-time science teacher next year instead. And then proposed additions would be an additional .5 account clerk within the business office to handle benefits and attendance. And then a full-time typist, so move from a .5 typist in the athletics office to full-time there. And again, some more additional lead teacher stipend positions. And all of these are less than 100,000 together. And some other additions that enhance facility evaluation is included in here. Replacement of the AEDs, which I spoke of. Replacement of computers and 3D printers for the tech classes. And Suburban to replace that mail van, which is 15 years old. I looked it up. And then an additional van for transportation, so we have a little bit more flexibility with our students and staff. And then replacement of audiometer and vision equipment in the nurse's office and a new logo. So the BOCES budget here, the proposed is about 6.1 million. The last year's adopted was 5.1, but we're over that right now currently. So the increase in year over year is about 900,000. But when I look at actual to what we're proposing, it's less than that. We do have increase in student placement within our alternative programs there, special education programs, and as we spoke about, the TTP, the temporary therapeutic program. So putting it all together, the revenues at 70.70 million, and then our total estimated expenses at 71.1 leaves us with a deficit remaining of about $419,474. And then on the next page are my recommendations for this deficit is the use of fund balance and reserves. So I have appropriate fund balance in the amount of $278,910. Appropriate from the unemployment reserve the amount that's budgeted of $25,000, and appropriate from the employee retirement system reserve of $116,364, giving us a total of the $419,474. And the amount, that $116,000 is the amount of the budget increase year over year within that employee's retirement system employer contribution. And then on the next slide, we have the district reserves and fund balance. So I have all of the reserve and the fund balance categories all the way to the left. The first column is the balance in those as June 30th, 2022. And then right now, kind of the estimated balance for June 30, 2023. And then the next column would be like the recommended changes that I have. And then, so the final ending numbers there. Again, estimated. So I'll start kind of with the teacher's retirement system. That amount in the proposed column is 2% of the preceding year, which is what we're allowed to put in that each year, but not more than 10% of the total, I should say, the total TRS employee salaries that were paid out the preceding year. We can only put 2% of that in, so that's where that calculation comes from. But we can't have more than 10% overall, and we're definitely under that. And then the tax tertiary reserve, I have an additional $22,620 in liability. But I actually just had a judgment that we received yesterday that we're going to be paying out next month. So that amount is actually going to be lower than that. The liability will be lower after we pay that out. And then I have a decrease in the employee benefit accrued liability. That decrease is the estimated amount for our payouts to our retirees. So the retirees that have retired throughout the fiscal year, and then we have a few that we know are going to retire on June 30th. So we take the amount of their sick days that they still have available, and that they're given a certain amount per day. So those amounts can be paid from this reserve. So I'm estimating right now that that total is going to be about $69,000. And then the capital reserve, I have, that's not really a calculation, other than that it's the amount remaining after moving the unassigned amount over 4% to the other reserves. So in the last column, whatever I have above 4%, we have to find a home for it. So it's kind of like moving to our savings accounts, right? So the $526,000 is right now what I have estimated for that. Then we go down to the liability. That's a new one for us. We don't have that, but we have a few potential claims out there, and it was recommended by our attorney. So I'm adding that to our list in the amount of $200,000. And then the assigned appropriated, that's the amount of that budget gap that we have to fill. It's an accounting term, really. So that's why it's the $419,474. And then the last one is the unassigned fund balance. So all the way over the right is what 4% of next year's budget total is. So that's all we can have in that category. So at the end of June 30, 2022, it was at 2.6 million. I'm estimating that we'll have an additional about 1.4 million to add to that. And then to bring it up to just over 4 million. And then that's when we take that number, the amount over, which is at 1.2, that negative amount, and then we move it to those other funds. But I have to say that that's my estimate right now, but I'm still working on maximizing those federal grants. And there's a few things that were within the general fund budget that were expensed within there that I could possibly move to those grants. So that would free up more money within the general fund. So that number, I expect it to be a little bit higher than that. But again, I'm still working on figuring all that out. So I will have more next time probably, and definitely by June. That's what it's all about. So, that's what I have. Any questions? And I know within the packet is the property tax report card, so that's what's due to the state. So, so it takes your budget number, the tax levy calculation number that goes on there, and then we have to list the reserves and the purpose of the reserves and what we estimate the balances to be. That's within that.
Hi, Jean. You mentioned the substantial increase in transportation related to first student. With that RFP, how many bidders are there typically?
I don't know. Personally, this was the first one I've ever done.
Okay.
I came from districts where it was in-house transportation.
Okay.
And it was done 5 years ago, but I wasn't here then, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
But we had 2 this time.
2.
Yep, we expected a third, but that one didn't show up.
Is there any indication? I mean, a company like First Student is a big, pretty significantly big company. Any indication that they're sharing what the dramatic increase is a result of? I mean, are they being really overt and stating, look, we have all these unanticipated expenses related to moving to electric buses, you know, we have construction issues, we have capital issues, or
Well,
just curious where it's coming from if it's so significant.
well, I call it significant, but I do believe that the amount of the last proposal didn't keep pace with how it should have. So it was only at a 2% riser each year, whereas all the other companies had a CPI riser.
Okay.
So, you know, some years you win, some years you lose.
They're catching up.
And I think, from my understanding, that it was too low.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I spoke about this before at a meeting, but not so much this year, but in the past couple of years, a majority of their drivers were coming all the way from the Wallkill area. So they would be paid from the time they left their house until the time they got back to their house every day. So that's a lot more hours than if you're just paying for somebody who's coming down the street. So that, I think, contributed to, we need more money. We're not making any money here. We're losing money on Saugerties. And that's why we need to do another request for a proposal. You need to put it out there again because we can't keep doing it at this low of an amount. We're losing money on you. So that's why we went out for an RFP rather than, we do have the option to negotiate with them to continue the same contract at the same riser, but they couldn't do it. So that was the reason why we went out. So, and they came back, still the lowest bidder, but higher than we were at before, which we had anticipated that.
Thank you.
So going back, I just have some questions on the budget breakdown where we look at the increase in instruction of 1.4 million. It's indicated that that's mostly contractual increases and the cost of special education, as Dr. Butler had mentioned as well. Are there any positions in there? I mean, because you talked about later, like there's some positions from general fund that you might be able to pay with grant money. Is there anything going into next year's budget that was currently paid by grant money that is going to now be in general fund?
No.
Okay.
No. The positions that are, if we still have that grant money available, those are still going to be within grant money. Okay. So they're not all included in here, they're in grant money. And there's some term positions that we know we won't have. And then we talked about how we're going to kind of phase out the positions, certain ones. And again, we're just trying to maximize all of our grants. So the ones that weren't in there aren't in there. Like the ones that are being paid for grants aren't in here.
Okay. Any grants that are expiring that have now moved back into general fund?
I'm trying to think what. The one that's expiring doesn't necessarily have positions. So the one that's expiring has a few positions, but they're already built into the next one for the following year. So I think it's custodial worker and I'm trying to think off the top of my head, which is not very good. It's getting late. No?
Okay, and then we talked about on the district reserve and fund balance that our estimated fund balance at the end of June would be $4 million, which is an increase of the 1.4 you mentioned.
Yes.
So what is driving that surplus? Because we had estimated in last year's budget a $138,000 deficit and having to maybe appropriate that amount of fund balance for that, which we obviously were not having to use, and we have basically now, like, I guess, almost a $1.5 million surplus because we didn't have to use that. So what's driving that this year?
$1 million is the holiday premium from the health insurance. So, and honestly, 1.4 million, knowing that 1 million is from the health insurance, that's super tight. Like 400,000, it makes me nervous. That's how tight that was. So that's one of the things. I think I know more of like what's over rather than what's under. The transportation is still a bit under. What's over is sub costs. I didn't really anticipate that we would have so high of a need for subs. Plus we increased the sub rate, but just the amount of people that are sick or unable to come to work is a lot higher than anticipated. So that's another area. I usually just look at things that are over and not always look at things that are under. I'd have to see, but when I do another fund balance estimate, I usually go through all of the reasons why. I totally did not have time to do that much. And I know that I'm going to be moving stuff around because of the grants, so I didn't put that far into it.
Okay. And then just this is just from my understanding. So when we look at the recommendation to close the budget gap, we have the 419,000. And we're using fund balance, unemployment reserve, and ERS reserve. And then if I look at the fund balance, the reserves and fund balance on the next page, is there any correlation between these two pages? So like if I look at the unemployment reserve, we're going down from 90 to 77.5. So is that because we're taking $25,000 out of that?
No,
Okay.
the reason why it's going from 90 to 77.5 is within this current year, we said we were going to appropriate 25,000 to unemployment. So our unemployment expenses this current year, 125, it's about 12.5, whatever the difference between those two are, 12.5.
Okay.
That's what it is. So that entry will happen at the end of the year, so that's why it'll go from 90 to 77.5 within that year. That's what was appropriated from that reserve. So that's what we're going to do. But going forward, so at the end of the year, it will be 77.5. And then next year, we're saying we're going to fill the gap with that 25, but it really depends on how much we spend. Then it'll be transfer of what actually occurred, not the 25 that we said.
Okay.
So it's kind of like it moves to accounting, really, rather than budgeting after that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Before we do move on, we just want to recognize the board candidates. So this would be the order that they appear on the ballots. Jeff Riazzi, Carol Kelder, Timothy Wells, Ashley Sanders, Andrea Viviani, and I think several are in attendance tonight. So good luck, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. We'll move to board member remarks.
Just very quickly, giving a BOCES report. I didn't make the BOCES meeting because I was sick, but I do want to thank those of our board that were able to attend the annual meeting. It happened last Thursday at the BOCES in Port Ewan, and as always, I got a glowing report from how wonderful the food was, as well as the presenters. I'm most unhappy for not attending only because one of the youth presenters is a personal friend's daughter. So I was just like, no, I found out after that I missed it. And that's, I think, part of what makes serving on BOCES so much fun. It's just that this really is a community, and Ulster County is an amazing, amazing community. So when we bring all of our school districts together as components to BOCES, for the best and the brightest of our students to help them succeed, it makes for an amazing night. So at that event, they did present the annual budget, which you will see on the agenda for tonight for our vote, as well as the candidates for election to the Ulster BOCES Board of Directors, to which I am hoping to also continue on that. Although I'm not continuing here on this board, I do hope to continue in the Ulster County BOCES Board and to continue to report back to you all with hopefully some really great new reports in the future. So if anyone has any questions about BOCES, please continue to send them my way. Thank you.
Mr. Mooney?
Thank you. First off, I'd like to congratulate the valedictorian and salutatorian. Great work. I can't imagine having 102 average with anything. That's pretty incredible. I don't think I've ever seen an average that high. So congratulations to both of you. The weather's getting nicer. We're into spring sports. Seeing a lot of accidents. Please slow down. Please watch out for pedestrians. Please plan accordingly. Give yourself a couple extra minutes to get where you need to go. I want to thank you for coming. I was hoping some parents had come from Riccardi. I just wanted to say a couple things. First, I would love to invite you and whoever else would like to come to our facilities meetings. They are open meetings. We do hold them here the first Wednesday of the month at 5:30. So you're more than welcome to come. I just did want to say, you know, just two things, and it's not to discount anything you said, but by law, we have to put notices up 10 days before an abatement. So they were there. And the second thing is, as a public entity, we can't get away with using chemicals that are toxic or hazardous. So, you know, we're doing everything we can to remedy the situation. And, you know, obviously we're very sensitive to, you know, people who are getting sick, and we hope that we can find a solution, you know, quicker than anticipated. And the last thing I wanted to mention was the focus on mental health. So this has been something that Trustee Barringer and I can kind of talk to a little bit. The past few years, being on the Ulster County School Boards, you know, every once in a while we'll meet with people in political office and try and, you know, push an agenda to get more services for people. Unfortunately, there's really no beds in Ulster County, so if we have a kid that needs a bed or placement, they get placed out of county, and they're usually on the waiting list. And when you have a kid that needs help immediately, and then they have to wait 2 weeks before they can find a bed, that's tragic, and it's a very delicate situation. So we had spoken with former county exec Pat Ryan. I know he was working on it, and I know the current county exec Jen Metzger is working on it, and it was actually the meeting that Trustee Barringer missed. Was speaking with Dr. Schenker. Is he a doctor? Okay. I want to make sure I get my pronouns correctly. He's working on something as well. We're trying to get something in the works with BOCES, where BOCES can actually help us with even if it's an overnight kind of situation, and I don't want to obligate them to it, but obviously it's something that, you know, when you work with kids and they are at risk, you want to make sure that they're in a safe place. So, congratulations to all the prospective board members. I don't know if you know what you signed up for. I wish you luck, and I look forward to working with any and all of you, whether you are successful or not. Thank you.
Ms. Gage?
Just very quickly, kudos to our valedictorian, Ms. Hoyt, and our salutatorian, Ms. Patel. Those are amazing grade point averages, and I agree with you, Mr. Mooney. I don't think I ever had one that high in anything. And just good luck to the candidates that are running for the board. Thank you for choosing to volunteer your time, and good luck to all of you.
Anyone else? Not board president's remarks. Congratulations to those who are getting tenure tonight. Thank you to the special ed staff for all its hard work that was represented by its report tonight. Thank you for Ms. St. Moore for that detailed budget presentation. I know that from stopping by the Hildreth building, you've been working 17, 18 hours a day. And to Mr. Ursig, who worked 7 days this week dealing with numerous issues that come up, such as the recorded floor. Your efforts are all greatly appreciated. Thank you. In the interest of time, we'll skip the break and keep moving through the agenda, if that's okay with the board.
Can we pull J 2C?
Yes, we can.
For a roll call vote, please.
So I'll entertain a motion to approve items J 1, 2, A, B, D, and E.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mooney. Is there a second? Mr. Wall. Any discussion? None being heard.
Can I make a comment on this?
Sure.
As I have done before, and I think we've seen with a resignation for purposes of retirement, I'd like to congratulate Mr. DeFino. Mr. DeFino, someone that I knew as we were younger teachers together. Later on, many years later, our children went to school together, many of them side by side. I've gotten to know him through sports. The only opportunity I've had to work directly with Mr. DeFino was coaching Babe Ruth one year, and that's not something either one of us are attempting to remember that particular team. But I do know, having lived here, that Joe's been a very creative, and important influence for many people. And I think that when you look at the history of Saugerties and you look at some of the events in our school district, some of those more creative and inspiring and inventive ideas seem to originate, with Joe. And I think that in recognition of that, something I really would like to just make a very sincere congratulations and very best wishes to Joe. And congratulations on a great career. Thank you.
Any other discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I'll entertain a motion for item J2C. Ms. Polson, is there a second? Ms. Bellarosa, any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a roll call vote. Taylor?
Papa Tillman,
Yes.
James Mooney,
Abstain?
William Ball,
Yes.
Krista Barringer,
Yes.
Christine Bellarosa,
Yes.
Susan Gage,
Yes.
Raymond McClary,
Yes.
Scott Polston,
Yes.
Timothy Wells.
Yes.
Motion carries, 8 yes, 1 abstain.
I'll entertain a motion for items 3 and 4, appointments and appointment to tenure.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mooney, is there a second? Ms. Gage, any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, I see Ms. Vale on the back now.
We have Ms. Vale and Ms. Ponte.
Okay, congratulations, Mr. Fonte. Business office recommendations, item K. I'll entertain a motion for K 1, 2, 3.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Bellarosa, is there a second? Mr. Polson, any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Board action discussion items, I'll entertain a motion for items L 1 and 2. Moved by Mrs. Gage, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wills, any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Item L3, the annual election of members, I'll entertain a motion to move that into executive session for discussion.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson, is there a second? Second by Ms. Bellarosa. All those in favor of moving it into executive session say aye.
Aye.
Budget for the polling inspectors, item 4, and item 5, the budget resolution, I'm sorry, that's yes, 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mooney, is there a second? Any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Committee reports, audit committee?
No report.
Okay, facilities?
We've been going over the punch list with Honeywell, trying to close that out. I know we were waiting to hear back. It was a 2-week window. I'm not sure what the status on that is yet, but there are a couple things they need to come back and make sure are taken care of. Beside that, the Riccardi issue, just trying to make sure that everybody there's in, good health, and, hopefully we figured it out, what the problem was. Our next meeting is May 3rd at 5:30, and it is here. It'll actually be in the conference room when you come in. If we have overflow people, we'll move the meeting into this room here. Thank you.
Policy committee?
No, I think we're waiting on some updates from our attorneys.
Yes, we had a lot of second reads tonight. We also shared our progress on the dress code committee, and we talked about our suicide/traumatic event policy update, as long with our protocol for the safety plan.
Public recognition. Any member of the public wishing to address the board, please approach the podium.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Viviani. I live in Saugerties. Do you need my address?
Yes, please.
4 Rock Maple Road. I have some questions about Riccardi and what's going on with the abatement. I'm a little late to the party as far as the capital improvement project, so forgive my ignorance there. There was an article that I read from February of 2023 that said the abatement, any hazardous abatement, would be held off until the summer when the students were in session. So my first question is, what changed the trajectory of that calendar, so to speak? My second question is, why the decision was made to remove asbestos flooring in the building as old as Riccardi, and why wasn't it encased and covered with new flooring? And speaking with, and in full transparency, my father, my brother, and my uncle, who have worked in general construction for a combined 50+ years, they're advising me that in a situation such as this, it would be more cost effective and safer to encase the asbestos by laying new flooring over it. So I'm just concerned why that risk, and questioning why that risk was taken. And why we waited a week to make a decision to pull the kids and the teachers from the building. It seems that 5 days to go by and let those children sit in that odor when we knew on Tuesday it was an issue, that's a little disheartening and concerning as well. I have 2 of 3 of my children in the Riccardi building. I was fortunate that they were not directly affected. Their classrooms were not close in proximity to where this was taking place, or where it did take place. But if my kid was in the classroom near where that odor was coming from, I'd be extremely concerned. I understand that they're not hazardous materials as far as what was used in the abatement process, but if it's causing dizziness and sickness in staff and children, that to let Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday go by is scary for me as a mom. So, thank you.
Anyone else? None being heard, I'll entertain a motion to move into executive session.
Oh, okay. Withdraw.
Entertain a motion to move into executive session.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, none being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We will be coming out to vote on
I'm just starting like, this is not good. Yeah.
entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Gage, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Wells. Any discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, that's one down. I will call for a motion to untable the vote on the BOCES board positions.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mooney, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Ball. Any discussion on untabling the motion? None being heard, all those in favor of untabling say aye.
Aye.
I will make a motion to approve the slate of BOCES board candidates.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson, is there a second? Second by Ms. Villarosa. Any discussion? None being heard?
Bob, I'd like to just say that similar to the previous meeting where Krista, indicated her enthusiasm for this, I appreciate her reports, and I'm very personally thrilled that she's willing to still do this for our district.
Okay,
I
that's
agree.
being noted. And Mrs. Gage also noted, I think everybody's glad that you're doing it, so they don't have to do it. Any other discussion? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I will call for a motion to amend the board agenda to include an additional item on the superintendent search.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Wells, is there a second?
Second.
Second, I think Ms. Villarosa be here. So Ms. Villarosa is the second on amending the agenda. I don't know if we have to give this amendment a number or not. We can call it P1 is not even, we'll call it P2. So any discussion on amending the agenda to include this item? None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I will entertain a motion which would read as follows. The board approves entering into a COSA with the Ulster County BOCES to conduct a search for the superintendent of schools.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Gage, second by Mr. Mooney. Discussion. None being heard, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. I will now call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Wells. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Villarosa. Any discussion? None being heard. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.